In this video, I want to demonstrate how PathDesigner interacts with PathLoss 5 in terms of exchanging data between the files, actually loading files or loading information from PathLoss files, creating GR5 files, and essentially controlling PathLoss in a large way, not just on a one-by-one path, but in terms of a network view. Could be hundreds of PL5s at one time that are worked with. So I'll start with an empty tool. This is PathDesigner. I'm assuming that you don't know your way around the tool for this video, so I'll just show you the main menus or the main functions that are associated with interacting with PathLoss. So it's important to see the sites to know if there's any sites in the system. So I'll bring up the site manager from the site menu, and you can see it's an empty list. It's normally would have a list of sites if there were sites in the tool. Tool is currently empty. The same for the paths. It's empty. It's another large list of paths that have many views. We'll show a few of those later. There's also some equipment editors. The radio manager is here, and it's empty also. So I'm working with an empty manager, or an empty tool rather. There's also managers for antennas and lines, and I won't go there for the moment. So I'm going to start by loading some PathLoss files, assuming that somebody has given me some PathLoss files, they've done some work, and I'm going to load it as my starting point in terms of continuing the design. So in this folder on the right here, I have some sample PL5s that were given to me. So I can, from PathDesigner, I can go and browse for those. Under the network menu here, there's a import PL5s into network function, and I'll go and browse for those PL5s and click open. What that will do is it will create the path definitions, the site definitions, and all of the equipment definitions that it extracted from those PL5s. So essentially I'll have loaded the network from all those PL5s into PathDesigner. So if I go look at the paths, we'll see there's now paths, there's a path list. And the end sites are here, site A and site B, and then there's a little bit of information about them in this view. This is a high-level list view. I can also look at the list of sites that came in. You can see them here on the left. There's not much other information because PathLoss does not contain a lot of information about sites. There are editors behind this that show things like coordinates and elevation and a whole raft of other information, but as I say, not much comes out of PathLoss except perhaps for coordinates and elevations and such. So now the other place we can look at things that came in was the radio manager. So this is the radio manager. These are the radios that it extracted from the PL5s that it read in with the modulations for each of them. So these are adaptive modulation radios, so there's many possible modulations. Now if I look in the paths and I choose, actually these all came in locked, I should mention. So I'm going to unlock them. I just select them and click unlock here. The lock is a good protection for data until you're ready to edit it. Things do come in locked. Now if I double click on one of these paths, so I'll click on this one here, it'll bring up the detail editor for the paths, and you can see that there's a site A on the left and a site B on the right. In the center there's site A radio and site B radio with the associated modulations. Antennas are down below. Just to the left there's site A main, site B main is to the right here, and then if there was diversity it would be in these spaces. And if there was waveguide, this would be filled in here as well. So these are what came out of those PL5s that were imported, that was extracted from them. Now at the bottom of this form, again I won't go through the details, we'll be here a long time, but at the bottom there's a function area for PathLoss. If I click on go to PL5, it'll open the PathLoss 5 file for this specific path. And if I click on the radio and PathLoss, I can see this IAP AMR 18G is the same radio, and you can see the modulation is 256 QAM, which is what this modulation is here. So it's just to show you that what came into the tool aligns with the PathLoss file. So you can go back and forth simply by clicking on this button. Now the next thing I would show you in here is that if I have an empty, basically the paths exist in the tool, but there's no equipment. I have an empty path in terms of equipment, that I can read the equipment directly from the paths which are already part, or the PL5s which are part of the network. So I'll just clear them out here, and same with the antennas, and I'll save them. So that means that this particular path in PathDesigner has no equipment in it. So I can, using this functionality at the bottom, I can read in the equipment from the PL5 just simply by clicking on this button. It knows where the path is, where the PL5 is, because it's associated with this path. I click on this and it reads it in, and in a moment you can see that the radio was populated here and the antenna was populated here. It was not saved. One of the pop-ups I quickly clicked on tells me it wasn't saved, but they're loaded, so I just have to save here. So that's how I read in information to the PathLoss file. If I go to the PathLoss file and clear out the equipment in the PathLoss file, I can then write in the other direction from PathDesigner. Now, so in here I can say clear this guy out. Not sure how you would clear it out completely. Maybe erase, erase, erase. There's a function in PathDesigner to do this through a menu. No, it still keeps all this stuff, but essentially I did erase some of it. I'll show you a different way to do it. It's going to be more effective. With the path selected here, I have an equipment menu which allows me to clear the PL5 equipment. So that's probably a better way to do it because it clears everything. And so now if from this particular path, if I go open it, you can see it's empty. So that's a lot easier than manually trying to clear stuff out. But I still have equipment here in my PathDesigner path details. And so I can write that equipment to the PathLoss file. I just click on the Save to PL5 button here. I should point out it also writes other things like antenna center lines and so on, as I said earlier. So Save to PL5, writes notes also. There's a lot of notes that go into the PathLoss file if you have them. Now if I open the PathLoss file, you can see everything's back where it was. And if I look at the radio type, you can see it aligns. So that's what I've basically just shown you, is the two directions of reading and writing between PathLoss and PathDesigner for a single path. This can be done in bulk as well. So if I choose in my Path Manager, I could choose, whichever paths I'm interested in. I could choose them all for that matter, and then read in all the equipment in all of the PL5s. So I just go to my menu and I say read equipment from the PL5s, and all equipment in band or just radios, whatever I want, and it'll do that. And if the equipment that comes in is not in the managers, the radio equipment and the antenna and waveguide managers, if they're not in those managers, they will also be populated, or they may be updated. In fact, they will be updated with the specs from the PL5s as they come in. So not only does it fill out the equipment in the paths, it also fills out the equipment in the radio manager and antenna manager and so on. So that's how you can do it in bulk. And in reverse, if I want to write equipment, I could just select whichever paths I want and just say write, and essentially it's the same process in reverse. Now in this view, we're looking at an equipment view here. There's several views. In this view we can see PathDesigner radio, there's PathLoss radio, and the same with antennas on the right here. Sometimes this is not updated because somebody's gone in and manually adjusted a PathLoss file, for example, so this wouldn't have no way to know, but you can scan the PL5s and update this view. So you just click on scan and tell it to do them all, and essentially it goes and it reads all the PL5s in the system associated with this project, in other words these 8 paths, and updates them. And so these entries here, and the same for the antennas, are all updated automatically. Now the other thing I can do, other than reading and writing to PathLoss files, is I can read in PathLoss equipment files. So currently the equipment that's in the tool, I'll look at radio specifically, this is what came from the PathLoss files, but I could perhaps load another set of equipment and use it automatically. So for example, I have an equipment database that's been set up with NEC equipment. Now that was NEC iPasso radios and antennas from Andrew, I believe. these were created, this database was created by reading in RSD files, and I may show you that at the end because it's a little more complicated, but I'll start by loading an equipment database. And so I go to my demo data here, and I have it's just basically an access file. It's an equipment database file, and I load it. There's 101 radios in here, quite a number of antennas, I believe, as well. So all of those are coming into my managers. They're not touching the paths or the PL5s at this point, but they're coming into the radio and antenna and waveguide managers. It takes a second and it'll be done. Okay, so if I go look at my radio manager, for example, these are what I brought in. So there's 101 radios, as I said, and each one of them has 5 or 6 modulations associated with them. So in any of the paths, now that I go into the path here, I can choose the band that I want to work in. This looks like it's 18 gig. And then I can choose the radio. So I can manually do this, just choose from the new list that I brought in. And the same with the antennas. So I can go through this exercise manually, one link at a time. There's better ways of doing it. So the next better way is I could say, well, I want to do them all. So I could choose all of my paths, and I go into the global edit, which allows me to set them all at one time. So I set them all to 18 gig, and I choose all the radios. Oops, I have to set the configuration, unprotected, and then I can choose the radios. So, and then I would just save, and they will all get set with that radio. So that's the second way to do it. The easiest and perhaps most efficient and really truly the best way to do it is to use the solver for equipment. So there's an equipment solver here. Apply equipment under the equipment menu. It will find the best solution in terms of equipment and combinations of radios and antennas. So perhaps a low power radio with a big antenna is a good solution, but maybe a better solution is a low power radio with a larger antenna or smaller, whichever, all those combinations. So I start by setting my objective. I'll use 99.99. I choose what's important to me. Usually small antennas are important because they're lower cost, installations, lease on towers, that kind of thing. But I may want, maximize my capacity, so I could say highest capacity. So when it's scanning through equipment and it's looking at the antennas and the radios, it's putting them together in combinations, running the availability to see if they meet for the paths that are selected. And if they meet this objective, then they're a potential solution, and then it would compare that combination of antennas and radios with other solutions that it's looked at. And if the new one has lower antennas in this particular example, smaller antennas, it would use the new solution. But if the antennas were the same size as the best other solution, then it would look at the next priority, which is highest capacity. So it would say, well, which of the two radios or combinations works best? So it goes through that exercise of choosing the best solution based on these priorities. In order to go through the exercise of matching up equipment to find the best solution, you have to tell it what equipment you want it to use. So you can go into the radio manager and select specific radios. I want this one, oops, say this guy. So I can choose them as I wish. That's one way to do it. And same for the antennas and the waveguide. A more interesting way is to look at them all. So there's a button here that says select them all. So it will then select all the radios and all the antennas and all the waveguides as possible solutions. It'll also choose the right band if I don't mind it changing band. So I could have it choose the best band to make this work well, or I could have it not change the band. If I absolutely have to operate in the band I've set it for, I can do that. So and there's quite a number of other options here, but essentially after I've gone through that exercise, I just say solve, and it runs through all the combinations of all the equipment in the tool. As I say, 101 radios in this particular example, and I'm not sure how many antennas, but it makes an awful lot of combinations, and it's testing every single combination to see if it works for this path to meet that availability. It also looks at capacity. If the capacity has been set on the path as, requiring a minimum of 100 megabits, for example, it'll make sure the radio that's selected meets that requirement. And it comes up with a solution. It gives the best equipment, and it tells me it's found the best solution here. So if I go back to my Path Manager and I look at here, you can see the radios that it found. And if I want to look at an individual one, just double click it, bring up my detail editor, and it found this 64 QAM radio with 1-foot antennas, because I asked for smallest antennas. So that's my solution that it found, and it did it for every single path that was selected. So it's pretty quick that way. If I look at the PL5 again, you can see that we still have this original AMR18G radio, but I can write this equipment to the PL5, and I can do that just from here, or I can do it from my menu. So I can say write here, radios, I'll do all equipment, and then if I open this guy up and go to the PL5 and look, you can see it's this radio that it found as the best solution. So it works really well in terms of finding the absolute best solution based on the criteria. The other thing I'm probably not going to show you because it's a bit long as a process, but I'll show you the menu, is we can read in RSD files, which is the detailed data spec files from PathLoss for the radios. RAF is a text version of it. These are some lookup files, RAD and MRD files that PathLoss generates you can use. You can actually create a lookup file, and you can read in the antenna files, similar lookup files, different types. So there's a number of ways of getting equipment into the tool. And I guess the last thing I'll show you is the mapping, since we're going to talk about GR5s a little bit here. Now if I want to plot all these paths, I can just select them all. There's a select all, and then there's a map function. Plot GR5. I can do other kinds of maps, ArcMap, Bing Maps, Google Earth Maps, various versions of it, topo files for survey work, that kind of thing. So we'll do a GR5 map. I can use standard groups or layers. These are the standards that we defined, but you can also set up customized layering systems. So let's just clear this out, and we'll say, well, I want to show different layers based upon different structure types for sites, for example. And for paths, I want to see, I don't know, the path clearance status, in terms of is it blocked or not. Although I haven't analyzed these, they're all going to be clear, but that would be the idea. I can also add labels to the path. So say I want to see the path length on the path, and I can change the name of the site. I can have call sign, for example, or structure height, site ID, concatenated, so I get information that way. So you go through these selections, and you can have multiple groupings of structure type, maybe with whether it's an active site or not, or who the owner is, that kind of thing. So you can create multiple layers based upon these combinations. I then click the plot button. It asks me where to save it, and I will overwrite the one that's there already. Yes, so it's saving it, and it opened it. And if I go look closely in my GR5 that it created, whoops, you can see the labels it created. The lines are just this dotted gray or black. If the paths had been analyzed for clearance, they would be showing red if they were blocked, green if they were clear, and surveyed, and if they weren't surveyed, they'd be showing blue, and so on. So there's a whole raft of color schemes we've created. Same with the sites, whether they're active or inactive, or whether they're different types of sites. We have different icons and different colors. So we can create GR5s, simply by going through that process. We can also read GR5s, and I don't have a good example at the moment, but there is a way to read in the GR5. So if you don't have anything but a GR5, you can go and read it in. It'll define the paths and the sites based upon whatever information is in the GR5 that's available. And you can also edit your GR5 manually. You have to stay with certain standards that it'll recognize, but if you manually go and you say you create a new link between two sites in your GR5 graphically, you can go and read that in, and it becomes part of the network in PathDesigner. Okay, so I think that gives you a pretty good idea of what we can do interacting with PathLoss. There are more functions, but this is kind of the most important that I've shown you. So I hope this has been helpful. Thank you.